About a week ago, I saw a news report. I can't remember the source now, but it said that Empire Cinemas were preparing to put six of the branches into administration. That accounts for 50% of all the branches. They had 12. And my immediate thought was, please not Sunderland, please not Sunderland. Looked at the list and right enough, Sunderland was there. Some of the other locations that have lost their Empire uh, multiplex is Wigan and Swindon. But I was gutted by the news because this is the only cinema we have. Sunderland's not a very big city, but it's not that small either. We have a population of 177,000 in the city proper and almost 300,000 in the administrative area, which includes some outlying towns. But we have no cinema, not within the city boundaries. Um, There are two Cinema World multiplexes just to the north and just to the south, but both are, a bus ride away. Whereas the Empire branch was in the city centre. And for me, someone who doesn't drive and very rarely uses public transport, that was obviously convenient. 19 years, 19 years it's been here. I remember when it opened in 2004. It was great because Sunderland at that time had no cinema. We had a cinema if anyone knows Sunderland, if you've ever been here, near the Parkland Interchange, and it was kind of the main cinema just before I came to the city in 2000, and it closed in 1999. So the first few years I was here, there's no cinema, and I remember having to get the bus into there's a former mining town called Bolden, just north of Sunderland, and that's where at that time I was UGC. It's now Cineworld. Now, getting a bus it's just not as convenient. I don't like public transport because you never know exactly how much it is. You have to look at timetables. There's just a lot more to it. I'm not saying I can't adapt. I'm not saying it's not something that can be learned, but clearly, it's it's not ideal. I'm speaking purely on a personal basis here. Also, it's going to be more expensive. For a regular showing at the Empire Sunderland. This is like, for example, a Hollywood film, 7.99, um, and less circulated sort of film, say an indie film or a British film, 5.99. And I don't need to worry about transport. I walk there, it's about 15 minutes. Now I have to figure out the bus fare, and for some inexplicable reason, most cinema chains don't put the prices on their websites. It's something I find quite irritating. I guess the reasoning is there's different price tariffs, but for any business, that's one of the first things I look at. If I go to a restaurant, I want to know what sort of prices they are. Um, and I think, anyone who knows what financial struggles are knows what I'm talking about. So, it's going to be more expensive. I know Cineworld is more expensive than the Empire. So let's say 10.99 for a regular ticket. And then, I don't know, 350 for a return bus fare. I don't know what it is. I need to check. That's quite an expensive night, you know. I never get cinema food. I'm not even factoring that in. Um, but this news, obviously I was gutted by it, but now there's this strike in Hollywood, and I think this sort of comes together. Actually, the official reason for the Empire putting some of its branches, half of its branches into administration was overheads. No, not so much overheads, but actually profit. I shouldn't say overheads, that wasn't the principal reason given. Profit, basically post-COVID, they just haven't made the footfall that they need to. They say that they've explored every avenue. I have to take their word for that. I know I haven't been asked. There hasn't been a sort of poll of customers like, what approach do you think we should take? Is there any sort of marketing technique that could be used? Something like putting tickets at half price. But the thing is, they were already the cheapest chain in the business, so probably that wouldn't have been viable. Um, but I'm gutted by it, and I hope that some sort of solution could be found. I hope we don't have to wait another 5 years, as was the case before the Empire opened, for another cinema. Now, like I say, there are cinemas in the vicinity in Bolden to the north of Sunderland and a place called Dalston Park, sort of a retail park to the south, but that's in County Durham. It's outside the county of Tyne and Wear, therefore, the ticket's going to be more expensive than the bus ticket. This just gets into it's a purely personal thing because I love the big screen and I don't care what anyone says. I don't think you can replace the big screen. Now, I use Netflix. I've used it for quite a while now. My sister-in-law very kindly put me on her tariff, but it's not the same. I think Netflix is okay. Actually, I'm not quite as cynical as some people in terms of what's offered. I think there is quite a lot of different productions there, and I think some of it's pretty good. It's engaging, but looking at what's happening in Hollywood, the strike, there's a few things that I think need to be understood. People may think actors, A-list actors, what on earth are they striking about? They're very comfortable lives, they're very wealthy people. But they need to understand that this strike is not about, those sort of people in the front, like big directors and actors. It's about people much lower down the ladder. Electricians, let's say more junior actors. There's a lot of people that this affects. Um, and what's the strike about? I've just watched an impassioned speech by Fran Drescher. She is the president of SAG AFTRA, which is the biggest union in Hollywood. Um, there are a lot of legitimate concerns about, for example, the role of AI in all of this. Now, I think AI can have its uses. I'm not totally skeptical of it, but I, for one, do not want to see actors, people who have trained hard in their craft, who rehearse extensively, who really put everything into their craft, replaced by artificial intelligence. I just don't think, no matter how realistic it is, there's something a little bit creepy about that. And I think it's, I think you could look at the industry. I mean, when the talkies first came in the early 1930s, I believe The Jazz Singer was the first talking film, 1927. There was a lot of concern and anger from those actors that the talkies would replace them. I think this is potentially even more drastic. In the end, they adapted. And there were some actors who worked in both silent film and in talking movies. But this is different, I think, drastic, because we're talking about actually human beings themselves being replaced by basically technology, by machines. I can understand why there's anger over that. Is big. It's going to put people out of their professions. Another thing that we can maybe compare this to is traditional cartoonists, illustrators. I'm probably not using the correct term here, but for example, if you look at traditional Disney films, that was extensive hand-drawn, illustrations. That was incredibly extensive, incredibly patient work. So the rise of CGI, the rise of everything being computerized, that threatened those illustrators in the 80s and 90s with the sort of Disney Renaissance going forward. So this isn't entirely a new thing, a changing industry, but I think this is more drastic than previous occasions. Um, Matt Damon made a point because some of these big actors have staged a walkout in solidarity, and they've got a lot of credit for doing so because they recognize that people lower down the pecking order who are not famous, who are not in the public eye, who really are in many ways the backbone of this industry. I mean, yes, big Hollywood films need their A-listers, they need their stars, but there are a lot of people, you'll only ever see them in the credits of a film. Whoever looks at credits? I mean, who's ever going to look at, oh, this person was the best grip in that movie, or this was electrician number three in that movie. It's just not something people look at, but they're a vital part of the industry. Um, they're the people who are being shafted. They're the people who are losing out. Um, Matt Damon made the point. You need to be earning 26,000 a year to claim health insurance. I think that's what he was. I'm not quite sure about the mechanics of how American health insurance works, but he was making the point that they're the people who are affected. Now, Matt Damon doesn't have to worry. He's a multimillionaire A-lister, but he recognizes that it's those at the bottom end of the ladder who are affected. And, fair play to him. and fair play to the other A-listers who are showing solidarity. Cillian Murphy, Kenneth Branagh, Margot Robbie, I believe they all walked out, or not so much walked out, but they left early from the Oppenheimer premiere in London as a mark of solidarity. Apparently, this is the first time in 60 years where both writers and actors have joined in solidarity. Previous strikes has been one or the other. 60 years, so that would bring us back to the early 1960s. Um, so this is a big story, and it will affect cinema. But I actually think there's a lot of things involved in this in terms of the future of cinema. Definitely AI, and the development of AI is a big, big factor. I think streaming services, I've long been concerned about this. Now, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I use Netflix, but I would hate the idea of streaming services replacing the big screen. Some people are blasé about this. I remember I was volunteering a while back in a charity shop, and some of my colleagues, we were talking about this, and they were kind of blasé about it. Oh, well, we can have the streaming services, and you can put a projector in your living room. It's not the same thing. It's just not. Um, I think cinemas haven't always, they haven't been quick enough to adapt in terms of, for example, the post-COVID environment. For instance, Empire says they exhausted all avenues. Well, I'm not sure that they did. Because maybe there could have been things they could have done to really tempt people to get into the cinema more after COVID. From what I could tell, they'd done very little to do that. All they had on their website was the social distancing disclaimer and, card payments only. But there was nothing to say, try and increase footfall. I couldn't see any sort of marketing technique. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I missed it. But I go to the cinema, or I went to the cinema regularly, and I didn't see that. So maybe they could have done more or done something differently. But maybe I'm being unfair here. Maybe they really did exhaust everything. Um, but I really think that the death of cinema, by which I mean the big screen, would be an utter, utter tragedy. I would not want this to become something where it's just kind of this retro thing. Like people go to, well, I'll make a comparison. Recently, I went with my father to something called the Tamfield Railway. It's the world's oldest preserved railway. At least it builds itself as such, and it's a very good claim to that, because it's part of the old Stockton Darlington line, which was the first railway in the world. Or not part of it, but it was a branch off from it, I believe. Um, and that's kind of a tourist attraction for preserved steam trains. But that's all it is. It's preserved. It's not a commercial thing. And now and again they'll have these like open days where you can come and see steam trains. I would hate it if cinema was kind of a novelty. Oh, remember when we used to have cinema, and there's only one or two cinemas stay open to kind of preserve the old ways. I think it would be an utter tragedy. So I really hope there's some enterprising people out there with capital, billionaires really who love cinema as much as people like me do, and they do what they can to preserve this. Um, and it may be that the industry, goes above the power of any individual. It may just be, it's a bit like the Industrial Revolution. No individual was powerful enough to overturn that. Um, I just think it would be a tragedy because as much as I mean, there is something nice about watching a movie in your living room, from the comfort of your own home. I do it. You can pause the DVD. If you're watching Netflix, well, pausing and rewinding is not as simple on Netflix as it is with a DVD, but it has its uses. I'm not saying otherwise, and again, I'm no hypocrite. I use it, but I just don't think you could beat the big screen in terms of that atmosphere, in terms of what that offers. And I think it would be a tragedy if we go down that path where cinema just becomes extinct. Um, there's far fewer cinema branches now than there were 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. At one point, Sunderland had 12 cinemas, and that was probably typical um, of cities around the country. Um, I don't have a magic wand here. I don't know what the answer is, but some have said, I was just looking through the comments, and whilst most people sympathise with the strike, some have pointed out that the strike itself will only accelerate the use of AI. But because the argument will be, well, AI doesn't strike. But I think there is greed involved, and I think some of these studios are screwing over the people that make them. Um, I can understand the anger. I think the industry, though, and I don't want to go too far off on a tangent here, but I do think the industry has also been overshadowed by other things in recent years. I've said it before. I think that the culture wars have for too long dominated cinema, and in this sense, actors are partly to blame for putting people off cinema because they've got too hung up on virtue signaling and politics, quite frankly, rather than entertainment for entertainment's sake. I mean, ultimately, people go to the cinema for escape. And I get really tired of film critics who microanalyze, well, what's the deeper meaning of this film? What's the message for black people, the message for women, the message for LGBT people. What's you know how about just entertainment for entertainment's sake? I think that aspect of it has overshadowed the industry. Um, and I'm not saying that cinema doesn't have a role to play in terms of those discussions. Of course it does, especially if the subject matter of a particular film is about that. Of course it does, but in recent years, Hollywood has absolutely been overshadowed by this, whether it be Oscars So White or Me Too or you name it. And again, I'm not saying that there isn't any legitimacy to these debates, but I think it's been far too dominant. And I think actors themselves have been guilty of jumping on the bandwagon and lecturing, for the fans. Because whilst I'm saying I sympathise with the actors, it's also the fans who are going to lose out. And in the end of the day, without the people who go to see movies, then the industry will crumble. It's a bit like parts of the world that rely heavily on tourism. They might complain about tourists, but without tourists, what do they have? Now, it's not exactly the same. I'm not saying actors complain about, those who go to see films, but it's like one needs the other in one way. I mean, with the tourism analogy, people need interesting places to see, the world's shared heritage. If a place becomes inundated with tourists, it gets ruined. Yet without tourists, its economy can crumble. So with the cinema industry, with the big screen industry, it needs that footfall. Um, but audiences don't want to be lectured. And the thing is, for someone like me, I love the cinema enough to really, see this for what it is, a tragedy to be going down this path. I think a lot of people are complacent because they've got tired of the politics of Hollywood. They've got tired of being lectured by A-list actors, and they've got tired of the the culture wars shackling over this thing. But I'm not implying that's like the major put off factor. There's a lot of things going on here. I think the rise of AI is definitely part of it. Um, what needs to be really, really understood is that ultimately, cinema is entertainment. Entertainment is not trivial. Entertainment is something that is vital, actually, for human happiness. I may as well say it for quality of life. We need escapism. We need entertainment. This isn't actually a trivial thing. People might say, oh, well, there's a lot of problems in the world. This is trivial. But I don't agree because, yes, there's war, there's famine, there's human rights abuses, there's There's a lot of very serious problems in the world, but this is the whole point. With the entertainment industry, of which cinema is a very big part, this is very vital as an escape mechanism. It's critical, in fact, like sports. Um, so I think there needs to be dialogue. I think there needs to be compromise, but I think the people who are making this industry need to be respected. Certainly actors, but also engineers, technicians, cinematographers, the cinematographers, I should say. I've never been able to pronounce that word. But yeah, just This needs to be resolved, and the studios need to understand the anger, and maybe not pay their executives so in such a greedy way. Um, it's no good saying they're struggling for money when their executives are being overpaid as they are. I mean, Fran Drescher was clearly pretty angry. She was clearly passionate in the speech she made, and I think a lot of people will be saying she's hit the nail on the head. Um, but I also think the industry itself needs to understand that it isn't just these factors like AI and the other things that has put people off the industry because if you don't, in the end of the day, even if you win this battle with AI, which is a real challenge, even if you win arguments about AI and all of that, if you polarize your base, if you polarize yours with the constant politicking and the constant, you know, enforcing of culture wars, and that is going to put people off, and that they are going to look at for other forms of entertainment. Not that Netflix is any less prone to the culture wars. If anything, it's even more so. So I don't think it's necessarily that people have went to Netflix to skip the culture wars, but ultimately, this industry needs to understand what it's about. What is it about? It's about first and foremost entertainment. That's it. Um, Even political films. You know, if you go to see a movie that's about some political scandal or about some brutal civil war or hard hitting drama like that, it's entertainment in a different way, but it's still escapism. It's still escapism. It's not the same as some light-hearted romantic comedy, but it's still escapism. So all film covers that. Um, anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. I hope that here in Sunderland we get some new multiplex sooner rather than later. I hope we're not waiting another 5 years. Um, I want to see Napoleon. It's good to see those sort of films are still being made, but this strike is going to impact a lot. Maybe probably not as much as COVID, but it will have an impact. Um, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'll have to go to one of those other multiplexes, but it's going to be an expensive night. But for me, it's very important. Let me know your thoughts on the future of cinema. I personally think it would be an utter tragedy if this industry was to collapse completely. Let me know your thoughts.